The woman standing beside my husband was supposed to be his new wife, young, nervous, and strangely familiar. At first, I thought she was just the mistress he had chosen while I was recovering from a crash. But then she stepped closer, looked into my eyes, and whispered the words that shattered the entire room. "You re my mother." In that moment, my husband's betrayal became something far more twisted. He hadn't just married another woman. He had found the daughter I gave up years ago and used her as part of his plan to steal my inheritance.
All I could hear was the steady beep of machines breathing for me. My name is Amelia, I'm 36, and I had just inherited $20 million from an uncle I hardly knew. I tried to shift, and a flash of white-hot pain reminded me about the wreck. That's when I noticed the TV in the corner. It was my husband, Ethan, but he wasn't by himself. He had his arm around a woman the reporter called his new wife. I always suspected betrayal, but I never expected to see it on the evening news. It's amazing how fast your world can just detonate. Just last week, I was racing home, ecstatic to tell Ethan my uncle left me his entire fortune, $20 million, a Boston brownstone, and the future we'd only ever dreamed of. But instead of happiness, I found a betrayal that hurt more than any physical pain. I'm Amelia, and I was never supposed to inherit $20 million from my Uncle Richard. Our family history was a tangled mess. He was my father's brother, but a nasty fight over a real estate deal had ripped them apart years ago. The resentment was so thick, we barely made eye contact at family gatherings. Even so, I clung to memories of visiting his incredible skyscraper projects when I was a kid. Those weekends felt like stepping into another world. Uncle Richard would let me see the blueprints and tell me amazing stories about building a city from nothing. Uncle Richard was a self-made real estate mogul who'd built an empire during Boston's big boom. He was a business legend, but his personal life was a complete mystery. He never married and had no children, choosing to pour all his energy and passion into his work. What I never realized was that he had been secretly following my career the entire time. "You have my drive," he told me once when I was about 13. "You're smart, you're tenacious, and you never give up." After I finished my master's degree, Uncle Richards began sending postcards, just a simple note for my birthday or a holiday. I always wrote him back, but kept it short, unsure how to mend the family feud. His postcards were just simple notes, with his thoughts on the market, and he'd sometimes ask about my research in architectural history. I never saw that he was gently trying to rebuild a bridge with the niece he barely even knew. About 6 months before the accident, I heard from my cousin that Uncle Richard was terminally ill. I knew I had to go see him. I was shocked to see how frail he looked in that hospital bed, a shadow of the powerful man I remembered. But his eyes were still sharp when I walked in. "Amelia!" he rasped, his voice thin. "I knew you would eventually find your way back." That one visit became weekly phone calls. We talked for hours, desperately trying to make up for lost time. He never brought up the argument with my father, not once, and I never asked him. It was like we made a silent deal to start over. "Life is far too short to hold on to old anger," he told me in one of our last conversations. That was a lesson I was about to learn the hard way. He passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 months after that. I was surprised by how deeply I mourned him. As for Ethan, our story began 9 years ago in a small, smoky jazz club. I was there reviewing the club for a history journal I wrote for. Ethan was a musician, and his complex, soulful music was all anyone was talking about. He had this incredible fire, a real spark when he spoke about his work. "Music is about creating harmony in a world full of noise," he told me on that first night. We started dating soon after that and were married at City Hall within a year. A big wedding was not in our budget, but it just felt right. Ethan was determined to make it as a composer, and I believed in his dream with all my heart. I took on a steady job as a historical consultant to cover our rent while he searched for gigs and record deals. For the first few years, even without money, we were happier than I'd ever been. We had a tiny apartment and watched every single penny, dreaming of a bigger life. He would compose music all night while I researched old buildings. We were a real team, each of us playing our part, but the last few years had been unbelievably hard. Ethan's music career had stalled, and the endless stream of rejection started to wear him down. He became quiet and distant and would often disappear for hours on end. If I asked where he went, he would snap that he needed artistic solitude or was meeting with contacts. Our savings account was constantly empty because he would spend our money on expensive equipment or studio time that led nowhere. "You just don't get what it takes to be a creator," was his usual excuse. I was at my office when I got the call from James Caldwell, my uncle's lawyer. "Amelia Vance, this is James Caldwell. I'm the executor of Richard Vance's estate. Are you able to come to my office this afternoon?" I said yes, thinking it was probably about a small keepsake or something similar. When James pushed the will across his polished desk, I thought I was going to faint. Uncle Richard had left everything to me, his entire fortune, $20 million, plus the brownstone on Beacon Hill. He updated his will after you two began speaking again, James explained. He was so impressed with the person you became. Inside the folder was a handwritten letter. It began, "Dear Amelia, if you're reading this, then my time on earth is over. I have watched you from afar and always admired your strength and your good heart. You have the fire I once did, but you have more kindness. This inheritance is a tool, not a fix for everything. Use it to build a wonderful life, be happy, and never forget that real worth isn't about money. With love, your Uncle Richard." I signed all the legal papers in a total daze, $20 million. It was an impossible amount of money. We could finally get out of debt. Ethan could build his dream studio. We could buy a home, travel the world, maybe even have a family. The sheer number of possibilities was just overwhelming. On my way home, I stopped and bought a rare guitar for Ethan, a gift to celebrate our new beginning. I knew I had to tell him in person. News this massive deserved a proper moment. I did call him, though, just to say I was heading home early with something huge to share. He sounded distracted, almost bothered. "I'm right in the middle of the piece, Amelia. It's really complex. This is huge, Ethan. I will be there in 30 minutes. Fine. Just don't break my focus. I'm in the zone." I ended the call, my excitement fading a little, but I was still smiling. I just figured his mood would change when he heard. I had no idea that would be the last normal conversation we would ever have. As I drove onto the freeway, a torrential downpour started, making the road slick. I remember turning up the music, planning exactly how I would tell Ethan the news. I thought maybe I'd have him close his eyes while I put the rare guitar in his hands right before I told him. I could picture his face, all the stress from the past few years just disappearing when he heard our financial problems were over. I was so caught up in that daydream I almost didn't see the disaster ahead. A massive truck in the lane next to me started to hydroplane, losing control on the wet road. It all seemed to happen in slow motion as it slid, the trailer swinging towards my car like a giant metal hand. I wrenched the steering wheel, but it was no use. The crash was a deafening shriek of metal, as my car was thrown into a sickening spin. The airbag punched me in the face with incredible force. In the middle of the chaos, I saw the guitar case fly across the passenger seat, the expensive gift tumbling through the air. My very last thought was about a billboard for a divorce attorney with the smug slogan, "Start your next chapter." And then everything went dark. I woke up to the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and that sterile, clean smell that only exists in hospitals. My entire body felt like it had been put through a grinder. Every single breath was a new wave of agony. I tried to shift and immediately wished I hadn't. "Take it easy," a gentle voice said. "You need to rest." My vision was too blurry to focus on the woman in light blue scrubs standing by my bed. Her name tag said Maria. What happened?" I managed to get out. "You were in a serious car accident on the interstate," Maria told me, adjusting one of my IV drips. "You've been unconscious for nearly 2 full days." 2 days? The words hit me like a physical blow. "My husband? Does Ethan know that I'm here?" Maria's expression tightened for a split second. "We called the emergency contact in your wallet and left a few messages, but he hasn't shown up yet." Even through the fog of painkillers, I felt a cold spike of fear. "Not yet, but I'm certain he'll get here soon," she added, though her tone was not very reassuring. Later that afternoon, Dr. Miller came in to review my list of injuries. 3 fractured ribs, a severe concussion, and a shattered femur that was now held together with metal plates. "You are extremely fortunate," he said. "The driver of the truck that struck your vehicle did not survive." Fortunate? Lying in that bed, unable to even reach my own husband, I did not feel fortunate at all. I kept calling Ethan's number, but it just went straight to his voicemail every single time. I sent him a series of text messages that were marked as delivered, but I never got a single reply. With each passing hour of silence, my anxiety began to spiral. My nurse, Maria, was the only person I had to talk to. She would visit me even off shift, bringing fashion magazines or just keeping me company. "Any news?" Nurse Patel asked on day 3, fluffing my pillows. I just shook my head, pain shooting up my back. It made no sense. Even if his phone died, he'd know I was missing. Day 4, a text from Julian finally came through. Buried in code for the launch, it read, "I'll try to swing by when I can." He didn't ask how I was, didn't ask if I needed anything. "That doesn't sound like him," the nurse said, glancing at my screen. "Can you call a friend to check on him?" I tried, my best friend, Maya, but she was weird and evasive, making flimsy excuses about why she couldn't get to the hospital. When I asked about Julian, my nurse's face would just tighten. After a week in that hospital bed, my gut was screaming. I grabbed the hospital tablet, logged into our joint bank account, and my heart stopped cold. It was an article on a tech news site congratulating Julian on securing a massive funding round. In the photo, he was at a launch party in Napa, his arm around another woman. My hand was shaking as I called him. He picked up, his voice tense over the background noise. "Julian, I'm in the hospital. I've been here for a week. Where are you?" There was a short pause. "Look, Lottie, I'm closing the deal of a lifetime. Bigger than your pregnant wife in a hospital?" Another silence. This one felt like it stretched on forever. When he spoke again, his voice was like ice. "I don't have time for your drama, Lottie. Some of us are building an actual legacy." And then he hung up. I just stared at the phone, my eyes burning. Drama? I had a $10 million inheritance from my grandmother coming in a month. I was his wife, carrying his baby, and I was utterly alone. An hour later, Nurse Patel found me sobbing and had to call for a sedative. As I drifted into sleep, one thought spun in my head. Something was deeply, terribly wrong. The days following Julian's cruel phone call were the darkest of my life. I couldn't eat. I could barely sleep. I just cried until my face was puffy and raw. The fear for my baby was real, but the agony of his betrayal was worse. 10 years together, and this is how it ends, with a phone call from a stranger wearing my husband's voice. Nurse Patel got so worried she brought in Dr. Reed, the hospital psychologist. She was a kind woman who didn't waste time on platitudes. She offered no empty sympathies. "You're experiencing multiple traumas at once," she explained. "The high-risk pregnancy, the shock of betrayal, and the terror of abandonment. It's completely normal to feel like your world is ending." "Did he know?" as I whispered, my voice all crackly. "About my grandmother's inheritance?" "What inheritance?" Dr. Reed asked, her voice soft. I hadn't told anyone here about the money. It felt unimportant next to everything else, but now I had to wonder if it was the reason for all this cruelty. "I have $10 million coming to me next month," I told her. I was going to tell him as a surprise. Dr. Reed's eyebrows flew up. "Well, that certainly does add another dimension to things." 2 days later, my best friend Maya finally appeared, holding a sad bouquet of flowers and refusing to look me in the eye. "You look terrible," she said, and then immediately winced. "Oh my God, Lottie, I am so sorry. I didn't mean—" "Why have you been avoiding my calls, Maya?" I asked, too tired for niceties. She sank into the guest chair, the flowers forgotten in her lap. "I didn't know how to tell you, Lottie. The whole situation is just awful. Just tell me what's going on with Julian." She picked at a thread on her jeans. "He's with someone else, a woman named Sophia." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean, with someone else?" "We're married." "He's been telling everybody that you left him," she whispered, tears welling up in her own eyes. "He said the pregnancy was too much for you and that you had a nervous breakdown. He threw a launch party at the house last week. I couldn't make myself go." The room began to spin. "He told everyone I abandoned him while I was lying here, terrified for our child." Maya just nodded, her expression pained. "I only knew you were here because Nurse Patel called me." "Lottie, he's blocked your number. He even had the locks on the house changed." "Show me," I said, my voice breaking. "Show me this woman." Reluctantly, Maya pulled out her phone and opened Instagram, and there he was, my husband. His arm was around a chic, dark-haired woman on a company retreat in Tahoe. They were clinking champagne glasses, looking like Silicon Valley's new power couple. There was something about her face that was disturbingly familiar. She looked younger than me, maybe late 20s, in a designer dress, with features that were a strange echo of my own. "Her name is Sophia Rossi," Maya said. "She's a venture capitalist. The rumor is they met a few months ago." A few months. While I was struggling through morning sickness, Julian was starting a new life with her. I felt sick to my stomach. "There's more," Maya added, lowering her voice. "The gossip is they got engaged last weekend." He gave her a huge diamond, engaged. My husband told everyone I was crazy, then got engaged to another woman. The sheer, calculated evil of it all stole my breath. Nurse Patel, who'd come in to check my vitals, saw the monitor spike and rushed to my side. "Okay, that's enough for today," she said, gently guiding a weeping Maya toward the exit. "I am so sorry, Lottie," Maya called out. "I should have told you sooner." After she left, the nurse sat with me, her quiet presence a comfort in the chaos. "You need a lawyer," she said. "This isn't just a cheating husband, Lottie. This is fraud." She was right. With her help, I called my family's attorney, Mr. Henderson, the next morning. "Charlotte, thank goodness. I've been trying to get a hold of you." The lawyer said, "I've been trying to reach you regarding some highly disturbing financial maneuvers." "Let me guess," I said, the words tasting like poison. "My husband has been asking about my inheritance." "It's worse than that. He came to my office with forged power of attorney papers, claiming you were mentally incompetent. He said you'd had a breakdown and that your family sent you to a private facility." The documents were very convincing forgeries, but they wouldn't have survived a serious legal challenge. He's trying to steal my money, I said, the ugly truth finally becoming clear. It seems so, and he wasn't alone. He brought a young woman he introduced as your cousin, claiming she could confirm your unstable condition. I replied automatically, I don't have a cousin. Then I felt a chill. What was her name? Italian, I believe. Sophia. An Italian name. That familiar-looking face, the uncanny resemblance that people had always commented on. The timing of her appearance in Julian's life right as my inheritance was about to be released. Mr. Henderson, I need a complete background check on this woman. And I need you in my hospital room tomorrow. I think my husband is in the middle of a very sophisticated con and I have to be ready for him. Sleep was impossible that night. My mind raced, connecting the dots of this whole nightmare. How did Julian know the exact date the funds would mature? Why choose a mistress who could pass for my cousin? By morning, a sick feeling had settled in my stomach. The theory was too monstrous to believe. I had Nurse Patel place a small hidden camera in my room, concealing it behind a floral arrangement. Then, using Maya S' phone, which she'd insisted on leaving with me, I texted Julian. I know about the power of attorney. I am perfectly lucid. You need to fix this before my lawyer calls the authorities. The reply was almost instant. Don't do anything rash. We will be there today. Delete this conversation. So, they were coming. And I was finally going to get some answers. I spent the morning resting, saving my energy. Nurse Patel helped me sit up in bed, arranging the pillows to make me look a bit more fragile than I actually felt. Dr. Reed gave me a quick pep talk on controlling my emotions. Remember, you are the one with all the power here, she told me. His lies and his performance only have an effect if you react to them. Mr. Henderson arrived just after lunch, his briefcase full of legal documents. He took a seat in the corner by the window, totally out of sight from the door. The tiny camera was on and recording, aimed directly at the foot of my hospital bed. Are you absolutely positive you want to do this? Mr. Henderson asked, his face full of concern for my condition. We can just let the police handle it from here. I have to look him in the eye, I said. I need to know why. At precisely 2 o'clock, there was a soft knock on the door. My heart pounded in my chest, the monitor betraying my calm expression. My sister Catherine gave my hand a squeeze, then stood guard by the bathroom door. Marcus walked in first, dressed in a bespoke suit I'd never seen before. His hair was slick-tossed back, and a watch on his wrist was worth more than our first condo. The change from hungry startup founder to a titan of industry was jarring. When his eyes met mine, his face wasn't relieved. It was annoyed, quickly hidden behind a mask of intense concern. "Eleanor," he said, his voice dripping with false emotion. "You're awake." We were so incredibly worried. "We?" I asked, my own voice steady and clear. He glanced back at the door, motioning for someone to enter. A young woman stepped into view, half shielded by his arm. All I could see at first was a spill of blonde hair and a designer dress that screamed new money. "You remember Sophie, don't you?" he asked, his tone smooth as polished glass. "My new assistant." I said nothing, just watching him stride into the room, his arrogance growing with every step. He was always a phenomenal actor, capable of playing any role. Today, he was the doting husband. "The doctors said the trauma might affect your memory," he went on. "A few things have changed while you've been resting. Like telling everyone I had a nervous breakdown?" I replied, my voice dangerously low. He hesitated for a heartbeat before the mask was back. "Eleanor, that's a ridiculous rumor. When you were first brought in, things looked bad. I was half mad with grief. People are just twisting my words. And the new mansion in Pacific Heights? The new sports car? The engagement party?" His eyes narrowed for a split second. "You've been listening to gossip, my love. That's not healthy for your recovery. The only thing that matters is you getting better and us protecting our assets." He pulled a folder from his jacket. "The doctors agree you shouldn't have any stress. This just gives me power of attorney while you get back on your feet." I almost had to respect the performance. If my head wasn't pounding, I might have fallen for his worried husband act, but I saw the hunger in his eyes as he pushed the pen towards me. "You mean to protect the $30 million from my company's acquisition?" I said, my voice like a razor. He flinched a tiny crack in his perfect armor. "You remember. Great news, yes, but it's a huge responsibility. With your concussion, the stress of managing that kind of money could delay your healing for months. How incredibly thoughtful of you to be so concerned." He smiled, mistaking my silence for defeat. "I've always taken care of you, Ellie. Is that why you froze our bank accounts, had the locks changed on our home, and told my own sister I was delusional?" Marcus's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. "You're confused. It's the medication talking. Perhaps you could show her the offshore wire requests," a calm voice said from the window. Marcus spun around, utterly blindsided. Who in the hell are you? Arthur Albright, Mrs. Vance's attorney. And you must be the husband trying to declare his wife incompetent before she can stop him from stealing her fortune. Mr. Albright placed a file on my tray, full of texts between Marcus and a younger woman, planning my unfortunate accident and their financial future. That's enough, Marcus snarled, lunging for the folder. Don't you touch that, my sister Catherine snapped, stepping between them. The hospital's security team is on its way. The young woman, who had been lurking by the door, finally stepped into the light, her curiosity stronger than her fear. As she drew closer, I saw her face properly for the first time. The resemblance hit me like a physical blow. She had my mother's jaw, a nose that was a perfect copy of mine. Her whole posture was a ghostly image of me at 18. But it was something more, a deep cellular sense of knowing. The woman, Sophie, just stared at me, her expression shifting from nervous to confused to pure, unfiltered shock. "Oh my God," she breathed, her voice a mere whisper. You're my mother." The world stopped turning. The entire room fell silent. Marcus lunged for her, grabbing her by the arm. "Be quiet," he hissed. "You're ruining the plan." But Sophie seemed lost in a trance, her eyes locked on mine as if she'd just seen a ghost. With shaking fingers, she fumbled in her handbag and pulled out a faded, creased photograph. "I have looked for you my entire life," she stammered, holding it out. It was a picture of a teenage girl holding a newborn. The girl's face was in shadow, but I knew it was me. A photo I hadn't seen in 19 years. As I stared at the proof of my deepest secret, the hospital room began to tilt. The heart monitor screamed as my past slammed into my present. My hands trembled as I took the old photograph from her. The girl in the picture was so young, so completely terrified, her eyes swollen from crying as she held her baby for the one and only time. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. "It was tucked into my receiving blanket when I was adopted," Sophie said softly. "The agency said it was the only thing my birth mother left behind for me. I've kept it with me always." Marcus jumped in. "This is crazy. She's a grifter. Eleanor obviously taking advantage of your condition." "Shut up, Marcus," I said with a power that felt foreign. "For once in your miserable life, just shut your mouth." As I looked back at Sophie, really saw her. She had my father's hairline in my eyes. How had I never seen it? Because for 19 years, I had willed myself to forget. "I was 16, I began, my voice quiet but strong. A junior in high school with a scholarship to Stanford. My boyfriend wanted nothing to do with a baby, and my parents were terrified of the scandal in our small town." Sophie sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes wide with tears. "They sent me away to a group home in another state. After you were born, they arranged a closed adoption. I was allowed to hold you just once. Someone took that picture, but I never knew they gave a copy to you." "My parents said it was the only thing they got," Sophie said. "They were wonderful and always told me the truth. When I turned 18, they helped me start my search." "And how, exactly, did you find Marcus?" Mr. Albright asked, his legal mind already fitting the pieces together. Sophie glanced at Marcus, who stood frozen with rage. "I didn't find him," she admitted quietly. "He found me. He walked into the cafe where I work about 4 months ago. He told me he knew who my biological mother was." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. "The old art portfolio," I said, staring at Marcus. "You found it in the attic when we moved in last year." He was silent, but his glare confirmed everything. I had kept a dusty case with a few mementos from that time, the hospital ID bracelet, a tiny hat, and my own copy of that photo. "He told me you'd been looking for me," Sophie continued, "that you were a huge success but lonely, and you desperately wanted to meet me but were afraid I would reject you." "And when did the wedding proposal enter this little fairy tale?" I asked, my voice like ice. Sophie's face burned with shame. "It all happened so fast. He was so charming, so supportive. When he proposed 3 weeks ago, he said it would make you happy to see me settled with someone you approved of. It felt like a dream. And then I had my accident on the new campus project. And suddenly, I was worth a lot more to you dead than alive," I finished. Marcus finally broke. "You can't prove any of this. It's a pathetic fantasy you've cooked up to cheat me." Mr. Albright cleared his throat. "Actually, we can. We have the forged documents, your text messages, and of course, a bigamy charge, since you are still married to my client." "I don't understand," my sister Catherine cut in. "Why go through all this? Why not just stay with Eleanor and enjoy her success together?" I looked at Marcus, really saw the pathetic man he was, and I finally got it. I was never a partner. I was an investment, a backer for his failed ventures. But $30 million called for a much bigger, more twisted plan. "The family trust has a direct heir provision," Mr. Albright explained. "Had Eleanor died without children, half the estate would go to charities. With a child, the entire fortune stays within the direct bloodline. I see, I said, the cold logic settling in my bones. And as Sophie's new husband, Marcus would gain control of every single penny. Sophie stumbled backward, away from Marcus as if he was toxic. You used me. Everything you said to me about a future. About family. Oh, please, Marcus scoffed. It was a transaction. You got to meet your long-lost mommy and I made it happen. The money was just a perk. By trying to murder me and then marrying my daughter? I fired back, my voice shaking with rage. She would have inherited half of it eventually after you two had your touching reunion, he argued, his narcissism unbelievable. You were just committing fraud and conspiracy to commit murder to speed up the process, Mr. Albright corrected him. Marcus's face was a twisted mask of hatred. You can't prove a single thing. You don't have to, I said quietly. You just confessed. I turned to Sophie, whose entire world had just been blown apart. I am so sorry. I am so deeply sorry you were pulled into his disgusting game. She wiped away tears. I always fantasized about this day, but not like this. Marcus made a break for the door. This is absurd. I'm leaving. I wouldn't do that, Mr. Albright said calmly. Security is right outside, and the initial charges for fraud and conspiracy have already been filed. Attempting to flee would be a very bad idea. As if on cue, two security guards appeared in the doorway. Marcus's eyes darted around the room, a cornered animal with nowhere left to run. Dylan, he said, one last time, with that smooth voice I once loved. We can fix this. Just think about everything we've been through. Oh, I am, I replied, my voice hard as ice. I'm thinking about it all very clearly. Officers, he's the man you're here for. As they led Leo away, Maya and I were left standing in a sudden, heavy silence. 17 years of unanswered questions hung in the air. I never stopped thinking about you, I finally whispered to her, not for a single day. The weeks after were a blur of police interviews, legal paperwork, and tearful phone calls. My lawyer, Robert, was a lifesaver, digging up a mountain of proof that Leo had been planning this for over a year. He was disturbingly meticulous, Robert explained in my hospital room. He created a fake paper trail to suggest you discuss the inheritance, even forging entire email conversations between you two. So, what's he facing? I had to ask. It wasn't about sympathy. I just needed to understand the full scope of his deception. He's looking at fraud, forgery, grand larceny, and bigamy. We might even add conspiracy charges if we can prove he intentionally delayed calling for help. He's going to prison for a very, very long time. The betrayal still feels unreal, like I'm watching a movie about someone else. After 7 years of marriage, I have to accept that I never really knew the man I was sleeping next to. So his marriage to your mother? I asked Maya, nodding to know. It's being annulled. Since your marriage to my dad was never legally dissolved, his union with her is totally invalid. And with all the evidence of fraud, it's an open and shut case. Maya started visiting me every day after that first real talk. Our first few conversations were so awkward, filled with long pauses and nervous questions. How do you even begin to build a relationship with a daughter you gave up 17 years ago? Tell me about your parents, I finally asked one afternoon. Your adoptive parents. Maya's whole expression softened. They're amazing. My dad is a high school science teacher and my mom is a librarian. They never, ever let me feel anything but completely loved. I'm so happy to hear that. It's all I ever wanted for you. They want to meet you whenever you're ready, she added, her voice a little shaky. They never spoke badly of you. They just said you were young and wanted me to have a better life than you could provide. Tears started to sting my eyes. They sound wonderful. So why didn't you ever look for me? The one question she'd been holding back finally came out. I took a deep, shaky breath. Mostly shame. I thought a clean break was best and honestly, I was terrified. Terrified of what? That you would hate me, that you'd have questions I couldn't answer. That seeing you happy with a new family would just shatter me all over again. Maya slowly reached over and took my hand. I could never hate you. I have a million questions, sure, but I understand. You were just a scared kid in an impossible spot. Her forgiveness, offered so freely, felt like it broke a dam inside me. For the first time since the accident, I just wept crying for 17 years of regret and what-ifs. Rachel, the nurse who came to check my vitals, quietly slipped out to give us our privacy. While my heart was starting to mend, the long journey of physical recovery was only just beginning. The surgeons had done incredible work on my leg, but I knew that learning to walk again would be an uphill battle. Those physical therapy sessions were brutal, leaving me completely exhausted and frustrated. You are making phenomenal progress, Dr. Evans told me during one of his visits. A lot of patients with injuries this severe would still be confined to bed. I have a very powerful reason to get back on my feet, I replied, looking over at Maya, who now came to my therapy sessions to be my personal cheerleader. My lawyer, Robert, visited with some more updates about the inheritance. With everything that has come to light, he said, we should discuss how you wish to manage the estate, especially now that you and Maya have found each other. It was the only thing I had been thinking about. Uncle Samuel left me everything because he had no idea Maya even existed. If he'd known he had a great niece, he would have included her. Are you saying you want to divide the inheritance? Robert asked, just to be sure. Yes, 50-50, straight down the middle. Maya started shaking her head immediately. Dealin, no, that is your inheritance. I didn't come looking for you to get money. I know that, I told her, my voice completely firm. But you are my family, and I have 17 years of missed birthdays to make up for. A couple of weeks after Leo's arrest, I got another visitor, Detective Miller, the lead investigator on the case. We found something during the search of your apartment, she said, setting a sealed evidence bag on the table. Inside was a prescription bottle. It had my name on it, but for a drug I had never even heard of. These are powerful sedatives, prescribed for severe insomnia, Detective Miller explained. And according to the pharmacy's records, this prescription was filled just 3 days before your car accident. I was stunned. I have never had a problem with sleep in my entire life. I'd never seen that bottle before. We're looking into the possibility that your husband was drugging you. A few neighbors mentioned hearing arguments before the crash. One said you seemed confused and exhausted the last time she saw you. The implication of her words sent a chill right through me. It was absolutely terrifying. Was Leo planning to kill me before he even knew about the inheritance? Did the car crash just present a perfect chance to finish what he started? We may never know for sure what was going on inside his head, Detective Miller admitted, but I can assure you, we are building a rock-solid case against him. As the date of my hospital release approached, the practical issues started piling up. I couldn't go back to the apartment I shared with Leo for obvious legal and emotional reasons, and a hotel just wasn't feasible for someone who needed this kind of ongoing care. You can stay with me, Maya offered. My apartment is small, but the building has an elevator. I hesitated, not wanting to be a burden on her after everything. It's not a burden. I want you there, she insisted, giving me a small, confident smile. Besides, we have a lot of catching up to do. Rachel, who had become a friend during my stay, offered another idea. What about your uncle's estate? Robert had mentioned the house was just sitting there, empty. An idea started to form. The country home where I spent some happy summers as a kid was now mine. It would need some work to be accessible for my recovery, but it represented a completely fresh start, far away from all the toxic memories of my life with Leo. But that's over an hour outside the city, I thought aloud. Maya, that would be a crazy commute for you to get to the art gallery. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting with her purse strap. About that, I actually quit my job at the gallery last week. There were just too many bad memories of Leo and how he used that place to get to me. So what are you going to do now? She took a deep breath. I was thinking about going back to school. I always wanted to get a degree in psychology. Maybe I can help other adoptees and birth parents find each other. It felt like destiny. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. The estate has more than enough room. You could stay with me while you sort it all out. Absolutely. The look of pure hope on her face was all the answer I needed. Out of the wreckage of all that betrayal and pain, a new family was beginning to form, one based on truth, not on deception. 6 weeks after the accident that nearly ended my life, I was finally discharged. Leaving the hospital, which had become my safe haven, was surprisingly hard. I gave Rachel a long hug and promised I'd send her updates on my progress. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, she told me. Remember that on the days when it gets tough. The drive to Uncle Samuel's estate, my estate now, was quiet. Maya concentrated on the winding country roads, while I watched the city skyline slowly disappear behind us into rolling green hills. A freak spring snow had fallen the night before, covering the landscape in a clean white blanket that felt like a true new beginning. The house was even more beautiful than I remembered from pictures, a modern design with huge glass walls overlooking a lake. My lawyer, Robert, had already arranged for contractors to make modifications for my recovery, installing ramps, setting up a bedroom on the first floor, and adding safety bars. So, what do you think? I asked Maya as we turned into the long driveway. It's incredible, she whispered, her eyes wide. It looks like it belongs in an architecture magazine. Those first few weeks were a period of major adjustment for both of us. We were mother and daughter, sure, but we were also strangers, learning each other's habits and finding our rhythm in this new life we were starting. I learned that Maya was an early bird who loved to sing completely off-key in the shower. She learned that I'm not really human until I've had my second cup of coffee. It was these little normal things that slowly started weaving our lives back together. My physical recovery was slow but steady, with a therapist coming to the house 3 times a week. The sharp shooting pains eventually subsided into a dull, manageable ache. As my body healed, I went from a wheelchair to a walker, and then to crutches, celebrating each little victory with cupcakes Maya would bring from a local bakery. But healing my heart was going to be a much bigger project. My therapist and I had our sessions online as I tried to process it all, not just Richard's devastating affair, but also finding Ava, the daughter I had given up. Dr. Albright warned me that relationships forged in fire can feel unbreakable at first, but are often incredibly fragile. She pushed me to give myself and Ava the time and space to build something real. Taking her advice, Ava and I found our own rhythm. We started with ferry rides on Fridays and exploring new Seattle coffee shops, and slowly, the 17 years of silence between us began to fade. One evening, a few months later, Ava finally brought up the one topic I was terrified of. "I think you should meet my parents," she said gently. "My adoptive parents." A wave of cold dread washed over me. "Do they despise me?" "No," she replied, her voice firm. "They always said you did what you had to." We set a date for the following weekend. I agonized for days over what to wear, what to say. How do you thank the people who raised your child? By Saturday morning, I was a complete mess. Mark and Helen were just as Ava described, kind, generous people who welcomed me with hugs instead of accusations. "We always felt like we were just keeping her safe for you," Helen told me, her hand on mine. "Waiting until you could find your way back." Their grace was overwhelming. They didn't see me as a rival for Ava's love. They saw me as family. By evening, we were planning Christmas together. But through it all, the federal case against my husband Richard was a constant shadow. I went to every court hearing, facing him from across the room with a resolve I didn't know I had. The charismatic tech genius I married was gone, replaced by a hollow man in a prison uniform. When the judge sentenced him to 15 years for fraud, I felt no joy or victory, just quiet relief. "Do you miss him?" Ava asked me that night. "No," I said, meaning it. Miss the man I thought I married, but he wasn't real. As the seasons changed, so did we. We started a garden that spring, turning over the soil for something new. There was a quiet healing in tending to those plants, like I was nurturing my own soul. My friend Daniel helped with the legal side, and we launched a foundation in my father's names, dedicated to helping women escape financial controlling partners. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it felt right. Ava started her law degree that fall, fascinated by corporate ethics. "You know, you would have been an awful tech wife," she teased one night, looking out at the city lights. "You're too real, too honest." "And yet I played the part for over a decade," I said. "Because you thought love meant shrinking yourself to make room for his ego." Her insight hit me hard. "When did you get so smart?" "I had good teachers," she said softly. "All 3 of my parents. With the legal mess behind me, my life was a blank canvas. My old career as a gallery curator felt like a distant memory. Now, financially independent, I could reinvent myself. I began to write, just to sort through the chaos. My story, with all the names changed, was painful and true, and it started to feel like a book. The writing was its own kind of therapy, turning all that hurt into purpose. A year to the day my old life collapsed, we had a small get-together. My friend Daniel was there, Detective Miller, and Ava's parents, Mark and Helen. These were the people who rebuilt my world. "I'd like to make a toast," I said, raising my glass, to the wrong turns that lead us to exactly where we're supposed to be. Later, after everyone left, Ava and I sat on the deck when she asked the one question left hanging. "Do you have any regrets?" She wasn't talking about the adoption. She meant the betrayal, all the pain. I took a deep breath. "Regret means wanting a different life," I said. "And I would never want a different life. Not one that didn't have you in it." Money has a way of revealing a person's true character, stripping away the performance to show you what's really there. Richard's betrayal taught me that lesson the hard way. But it's also what led me back to her. My daughter gave me a second chance at a love I thought was lost forever. It's strange how the most painful parts of a story can create the most beautiful endings. The betrayal that broke my heart was what ultimately healed my spirit. The husband who deceived me inadvertently brought me back to the daughter I'd lost for 18 years. The money that trapped me is now what gives me freedom. As the city lights twinkled, I knew real wealth isn't in some portfolio, it's the person sitting right next to you. I lost a husband, but I got my daughter back. I lost a marriage, but I found myself. I lost the life I had so carefully planned, and I built a new one that was messy and real and so much better. "What are you smilings about?" Ava asked, leaning her head on my shoulder. I looked at her and said, "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what really matters." Has a painful chapter in your life ever led to an unexpected gift? I'd love to read your story in the comments. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear that an ending can be a new beginning. Thank you for listening. And always remember, sometimes the moments that break you are the ones that make you whole.